And welcome to another installment of City Lights Live, the online edition of the City Lights events calendar. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush people. It is always an honor and a privilege to be able to do so. Tonight, City Lights, together with Duke University Press, celebrate the publication of My Father, the Messiah, a memoir by Gil Z. Hochberg. It's published, of course, by Duke University Press, and it traces a father and daughter relationship as it transforms across the decades, utilizing an archive of letters between the two, as well as her father's personal writings. Gil Hochberg crafts a powerful story of intimacy and loss that follows alongside changes in Israel's religious and political landscape. Professor Hochberg paints a tender portrait of the non-normative family life within which her queer identity unfolds, in a truly heart-rending account of her father's mental decline. It is a layered work that explores dimensions of familial and tribal loyalty, love, sexuality, identity, memory, and the political and religious divides that can emerge in a family. Now, the great power of the work is that Professor Hochberg maintains the rigor of an academic in her thinking and her exploration, while at the same time maintaining a sense of tenderness and humanity. My Father, the Messiah is a very compelling and deeply moving tome, and City Lights is honored to have Professor Hochberg here with us today. So Gil Z. Hochberg is Ransford Professor of Hebrew and Visual Studies, Comparative Literature, and Middle East Studies at Columbia University. She is the author of Visual Occupations, Vision and Visibility in a Conflict Zone. Also, the book Becoming Palestine, Toward an Archival Imagination of the Future, and In Spite of Partition, Jews, Arabs, and the Limits of Separatist Imagination. Her writing has appeared in Boundary 2, Social Text, Comparative Literature, GLQ, Arab Studies, Middle Eastern Report, amongst many other journals. So joining Professor Hochberg tonight in conversation will be Alysia Abbott. Alysia Abbott is the author of Fairyland, a memoir of my father, which was an ALA Stonewall Award winner of the Madame Figaro Prix Heroine, and a finalist for the Lambda Literary Awards, as well as a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice. Her writing has appeared in the Boston Globe, the Guardian, the New York Times, amongst others. She is, of course, no stranger to City Lights. We've had the great pleasure of hosting her in the past. She is co-founder of the Recollectors Project, which is dedicated to remembering parents lost to AIDS and supporting children they left behind. Formerly the director of the Boston Literary District, she now runs Grub Street's Memoir Incubator Program in Boston. So we're going to be making time for a Q&A at the end of the talk. We ask that you please post your questions and comments in the chat function from where we can retrieve them. And we're also going to be posting links in the chat with which you may purchase books. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Gil Hochberg and Alysia Abbott. It is such a delight and such a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's such a pleasure to have. Thank you so much for hosting this event. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with Gil Hochberg, whose memoir is, I'm holding the cover right here, is such a beautiful exploration of a complicated father-daughter relationship. I was immediately pulled into it, even when she reached out to me years before it was published, to be an early reader. So it's just an incredible pleasure to be able to find ourselves here on the stage at City Lights.
The pleasure is all mine, especially being in conversation with you. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know you have a short reading, but before we get to that, I just wanted to, talk even about sort of the title of the book and this idea of this father who you write soon after the book opens had two faces. You said, my father had two faces. And I just wonder if you could tell us what those two faces are.
Yeah, thank you so much. So actually, if you don't mind, I wasn't planning on reading this, but it is the beginning of the book before the beginning of the book. So I open with that, and I'll just read it because
Sure.
don't think I could do a better job otherwise. My father's face, dark complexion, long sideburn, meaty lips. When my father smiles, his whole face lightens up. His deep brown eyes shine and his mouth opens wide. Over the years, he got older and sicker. His face became puffy, his skin fluffy, flaky, and pale. He lost his smile and his eyes turned vacant. My father had two faces, the lively, gleeful face of his youth and the deranged face of his second part of his life. The former shines and glitters. The latter I rather forget, but cannot.
Thank you. That's so beautiful and evocative of your father. And, most people, they might have a hard, impenetrable, inscrutable parent relationship that once that parent dies, that's sort of the end of their ability to understand their parent. And you had such an interesting opportunity in that very soon after he died, really at the Shiva, you were able to find a way to reconcile those two faces or try to understand how a single person could contain such poles. And I wonder, thinking about as a daughter inheritance, how if you could tell us about this or share this reading about this moment where you didn't just discover but kind of seized this inheritance of his paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just say that indeed, as the sort of initiative for the book, which I didn't realize at the time, was the moment, a specific moment that I will read a part of in the Shiva, which was a very difficult period for me because I had a very strained relationship with his wife and her with me, and I was his only child. So there was a lot of stress right after his death. And it was also very early on, it was clear that in terms of heritage, etc., that he was leaving everything to her, which on the emotional level was very painful for me. And then, as the days of the Shiva went by, it was becoming very, very difficult. I happened to find what I will read now, which is really the beginning of this project, which then took many years for me to realize, but this is the beginning of it all. So this is a section that is titled His Study. His study was the only room in the apartment which was fully his. Very narrow, it was more like a walk-in closet than an actual room. He kept all of his books in small bookcases. Jewish sacred texts, Torah, Mishnah, Tehillim, Talmud, a few philosophy books, René Descartes, John Stuart Mill, George William Frederick Hegel, and a couple on statistics, one he'd authored himself. I touched the wooden desk, sniffed a few of the papers that he left on it. Here in his study, away from Miriam, away from the giant plants, the tchotchkes, and all the guests, I could finally be alone with him. I looked around and the unframed photos adhered to the walls. A large black and white photo of his own bar mitzvah, a few photos of me as a young child, a couple of old photos of his parents. Next to the photographs, there were several handwritten notes. He wrote them and taped them all around, mostly quotes from the Torah, alongside mathematical formulas he scribbled, and I was unable to decipher. I drank all this information with half-shut eyes, dreading the idea of going back to the main room. Then it suddenly occurred to me, I absolutely must find something of his, a souvenir, something concrete, something tangible that I could hold on to. And where else would I find it if not in his study? I hesitantly opened the drawers of the desk. They were messy, full of medical reports, bills, bank account information. I pushed all these aside, looking for something meaningful. Nothing in the top drawing, nothing in the middle one either. I opened the last drawer. There, behind a small plastic bag, I found an old brown leather folder. It was stuffed with paper, and when I picked it up, they all fell and scattered on the floor. I picked them up as fast as I could, my heart racing. His writing, a folder full of his writing. Handwritten notes, printed material, stories, poem, journal entries, small pieces on brownish paper dated 1965, 1967, 69, 76, 82, 1990, 1994, 2000. I shoved them all quickly into the folder frantically. Gili? I heard Miriam's metallic voice. She sounded alarmed. She noticed my absence. Where are you? She called again, her tone both hesitant and angry. Coming, I called back. I'm in Abba's study. Then silence. I knew my time was running out. She would be here in seconds. I must take this. I was thinking fast, my palms getting sweaty. I can't leave this. I can't leave this here. She got his apartment, his saving, his clothes, his car, his time, his name. I deserve at least his writing. Quickly, I hid the large folder under my black morning shirt and rushed back into the hole where my backpack was leaning against the wall. I could see Miriam talking to the neighbor in the kitchen, beginning to make her way towards the study. Got to do it now. I pulled the folder quickly under my shirt and shoved it into the bag. I felt a shiver down my spine. Miriam noticed and asked, "What were you doing in the study?" "Oh, I was just wanting to be alone for a while," I answered. "Please stay in the living room. You have no reason to sniff around the apartment," she said in her cold expression. Sniff around? I asked in disbelief before our conversation interrupted by new guests. The next day, I found the door to his study locked. I was shocked, but I no longer cared. I had all I wanted. I took a deep breath, joined the guests in the living room, and for the first time this entire week, I felt my lingering migraine fading away. I smiled to myself, thinking victoriously, I did it. I fucking did it. I have his writing. His memories are mine.
Yes, I cannot tell you like how exciting it is to hear that. Like I can feel the rush of a sense of getting away with something, but also claiming your birthright. In this story, uh, you enter the study and it's in a way, the way you describe it, it's like you're entering his mind and you're
Yeah,
taking what you can from the underworld to the surface to take with you. And it's almost like
absolutely.
a rescue mission. Like if you hadn't done this, we wouldn't be holding this book. You wouldn't have this incredible work of research and contemplation. But I wanted,
True.
and it's the inciting incident. You get these papers, and I know very well because I had that experience myself of like this is a treasure trove, like this will
Right.
help me understand. But I wanted, to sort of think about what you in that moment you were like, these are mine, his memories are mine, which I love because it's like the process of working on this project was such an intimate process. But even at this point, I wondered what you had in mind, like what you thought you would do
Hmm.
with it. And also if you could just tell us, like I think it'll be helpful, like
Yeah,
what period, like what were these materials? What period did they
right,
span?
right. Thank you. So the truth is, I, at that point, really did not think I'm going to do anything aside from reading it. But I did feel, first of all, I was really shocked because, I knew my dad was a professor of statistics. I knew at that point he was very mentally ill and I was very used to finding the house full of writings, mathematical equations that prove the existence of God and prove that he is God's Messiah, true Messiah, etc. But I really didn't, and I knew the only thing I knew was that there was a period during my late teens that he enrolled in a writing program at NYU where he was a professor, and I knew that he wrote some short stories that he used to send them to me for me to read. So that's all I knew. But then when I just realized the magnitude of the amount of writing and poetry, I had no idea. Now my mother, who's his divorcee, is a poet. So it in my mind, there can only be one poet in a family. And that was my mother. So it just to find poetry and as early as I think the earliest was 65
Amazing.
was and just lots and lots. So I really didn't think I would do anything with it. I just wanted to have it. And then the truth is that he passed away in 2013. And at that, it happened to be 1 year where me and my partner and our two young kids at the time, they were 7 and 4, spent a full sabbatical in Israel and Palestine. I was doing research on a book, and he died, which was unexpected. But when we went back, we lived in LA. I took the whole pile of his papers and just shoved them back in my closet. And a part of me really wanted to read them, but I really just felt I was afraid. I didn't know what I will find them in there. And I didn't do anything with it for quite a long time. So the book also describes, as you know, the different stages of kind of trying to read, getting into it, putting it back in the closet. And it took quite a long time. I think sometimes I think that without the pandemic, maybe it would have never happened. I don't know, because, the pandemic sort of suddenly I was alone and these boxes were there, and I felt that and we moved to New York and I had to organize the study, and I felt that I at least need to organize. And that's when I made his writings into an archive, right?
Yes.
That was a moment of archiving.
Yeah, and I think about this vexed. I think about this quote from Sylvia Plath's poem Daddy, where she talks about, marble heavy, bag full of God, and the awesome burden and opportunity of holding the mind of this man who was so important to your development, but also the power of being the archivist, of making order, of finding an order. And I think too of, the meaning of the word archive and the sort of Greek origins of house of the ruler, who determines what is in the house and how that is organized. And so I wonder if you could talk about that process. How did you organize the papers?
Right.
How is each section different?
Right. So it's interesting. I do write about that. I won't read that, but I'll actually read a little bit something related to that in a second, if that's okay. But so what I decided to do was I I found this drawer that has different colors. It's like a section of different colors, and I decided that I will divide the material based on colors. So there's a whole section in the book where I explain that there's the love poetry goes in the red, and there's the stories go in the white, and there's the ones and then there's the complete sort of the ones that I kind of call madman writing. They they go in green, but I also what was really the most soothing and important element for me about the process of archiving was how corporeal and how sensual it was, because most of the papers were really falling apart. They were completely falling apart. So I felt that I really was sort of committed to preserving every single piece of paper, every single photo. And so it was a lot of a lot of actual taking care of the material. And it was only after I did that, and after spending a lot of time touching the papers, that I really came to be able to write about it, but also sort of write with him and write on him sometimes, because there were some pages that I had to write over the words so that they won't disappear, because if they were completely fading.
Yeah, and you write really, what's really remarkable to me as you sort of describe the materials is how much detail you go into about the changing slant of his writing, the drippings of coffee or food, um, this, and then also those there were moments where you would literally write over his letters. So
Yes,
you were kind of
yes,
following his handwriting. And then of
right,
course, in producing this book, you were also his translator because you were translating
yes,
from Hebrew into English. So there
right,
are many levels of this intimacy in the process. And I think at one point you talked about how in writing about him, you were writing with him. And
yes.
I wonder if you could sort of touch on the sense of you feeling like you were maybe collaborating with him
Mm-hmm.
versus you know, you weren't just his stenographer, you weren't just
Right,
his secretary, like I'll type up everything, but you're
right,
actually you're in the process of making meaning and art from this.
right, right. Thank you. So yeah, I'll read a very short paragraph that I have in the prologue about this, and then I'll elaborate. I have become my father's archivist. He has become the object of my writing at times, but writing about him is also writing with him. This book is written between our bodies, between identities, temporalities, memories, spaces, genders, and sexualities, between the living and the dead. It
Mm,
is made of his writing and mine, his writing to me, his writing, his writing about my writing, and my writing about his writing. Mine, not mine, nor his. He, I, his, mine, we, us, he, I, my memory, his body, mine. Writing from this blurred space. I'll stop actually here, but I think I really, well, a lot, when I got more into his writings, there were a lot of things that surprised me. First of all, I was much more present in the
mm,
art in his writing than I would ever imagine, because I didn't know he continued to be preoccupied with me after he sort of had this big change in his life, and he went back to live in Israel, and he remarried, he became religious, he became very messianic. And we sort of drifted away. So I was quite surprised that to find myself. So I was reading him, I was finding myself in his writing. I was also reading a lot of his writings to me when I
mm,
was a child, and those brought a lot of
feeling.
childhood memories, right? So I had all of these writings, and then I found myself also having to, as you said, translate, but much of the translation was also a matter of, well, the translation was a hard task because I his Hebrew was in itself so complex, really. It had so many layers. It had biblical Hebrew, it had Aramaic, it had all of his yeshiva studies came out in it. And then I there were actually times that I did consult was a professor, two professors of rabbinic studies, because I wasn't completely sure how to translate. But in addition to the difficulty of translating, it was also this constant feeling that became more and more present to me as I went along, that he is, and I think that's part of, why at least I wrote, because it kept him alive and brought him back to
Mhm.
life. I
Mhm.
was talking to him. He had opinions about what I said. I had opinions about what he said, right? I mean, I'm not going to give it up, but the book actually ends with a dialogue between me and him. And so, yes, it is a book that I consider as much his than it is mine, or
Mhm.
at least it's a very much a shared project.
Yes, and and you have you have your own expertise and your own background and kind of different lenses through which to read and interpret these
Yeah.
materials. And I just want to touch on that. Some folks who don't know you, in the introduction, you are a college professor. You're a professor of Hebrew and Visual Studies, Comparative Literature, and Middle East Studies at Columbia University. You've published several books, so you know how to approach an archive as a scholar or a researcher. But you
Right.
also are approaching it, you write about, as sort of an investigator, like
Yes.
trying to learn when and why your father suffered this, mental break, like the
Right.
extent of which was his belief that he was the Messiah.
Yeah.
And then you're also a daughter who has lost her father, and who in revisiting these letters and his materials, you have these memories, like you say, that come back, but you also come face to face with yourself through his eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's this self who that self doesn't relate to him as Yosef Hochberg, accomplished
Right.
statistician. He was
Right.
your Abba. And so I just
Yes.
wonder how you navigated through these different perspectives. Like you're very rigorous.
It took
But
a very long time.
yeah, like how did you were there ever times where any of those were like in battle with each other?
A lot, a lot of times. So actually, I would say that I've been writing the book on and off from 2017. So it's and in terms of pages, it's a thin book. But the process has been very difficult. And what you're saying was a very great part of it, because there are many places in the book where I talk about how, I read books and write about books professionally. This is,
Yeah, that's
what I do for a living.
yeah.
But then suddenly, and then in the book I published, the academic book I published just before, is called the subtitle is Archives for the Future. It's all about archives, right? But then suddenly I was an archive that felt completely different, because in some ways I felt that I was 100% responsible for this archive, and that this archive, there were times I would go to sleep at the end of the day, and I would wake up a few hours later because I felt that there might have been a paper I forgot. I mean, it was
It was
really,
deep. Yeah.
it was quite deep and very challenging at time, um, and then there was also, there was a lot of tension between what I felt was my loyalty to his archive versus what am I supposed to do to maintain a respectful memory of my father, who, in the small community of biostatisticians, it
It's
was,
a very
a
important
known,
person.
an
Yeah.
important person. And I felt, there's a balance here between, he is not here for me to ask, but at some point, and fairly late in the process, I developed this habit of having imaginary conversations with him.
Mhm.
Uh, the last one I actually did document in the book, but I don't. There is also, I do admit, have the fear that people will, think that I'm also crazy. My father was crazy. I would, and so, but it is true that it started because he was infiltrating my dreams. So in my dreams, I had dialogues with him all the time. And then I
Wow.
just
As you were
realized
working on this, it just kept,
all
you
the
kept
time,
reading
all
them.
the time, all the time. And then I realized that I just need to turn this into an actual productive conversation. And so I had these elaborate dialogues with him, and that's how we got through it.
Wow. But you also say at some point you felt like the archive failed you. Do you
Yes,
remember
I
writing
actually
that?
was thinking of reading this little part.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you read
Yeah,
that part about the archive failing you?
find it.
Because there was this, this younger dad who was playful and fun, was
Right,
very different than the dad who's you saw in his final years.
right. Okay, so this part is called Lost. I will read parts of it. Lost and Found in the Archive. It has been several years since I've been working on this text, and I'm still not sure what it is. Do I need to know? All I know is that it is my attempt to grieve, or maybe it's actually my refusal to grieve, because as long as I continue to write about him and keep editing my words, his words, I keep him nearby. One often visits archives looking for specific information and answers, but ends up with new and unexpected ones. I came into this archival project taking on the process of archiving my father with a clear goal in mind. I wanted to recreate, order, and make sense of my father. Above all, I wanted to catalog and keep intact my two dads. The young and healthy dad of my childhood, my hero, my best friend, the partner of my secrets and mischief, and then the old one, the sick, the crazy dad of my adulthood, whose madness terrified me. I wanted to keep these two dads as separate and far apart as possible. Coming into this archival project, I had a narrative to protect. My dad was perfect when I was a child, and then he suddenly had a nervous breakdown at the age of 45 and became totally a different person. But his archive, like all archives, had other plans. The archive I created with his writings failed me. It took away my fantasy of his sudden fall and continued to challenge my childhood memories of comfort and playfulness. I had to come to terms with the fact that my starting point was wrong. I never had two dads. He was always one and split as such, always caught in between, going back and forth between fantasies of grandeur and profound depression. He was the king of Yehud, the chosen son, the most brilliant statistician. Yet deep inside, he always felt like he was nothing at all.
Mm. Um, and you write about even his work as this statistician. His expertise was, can you remind me? It was
So in English, it's the study of, I have to, believe it or not,
false
I still have.
revelation. I think it was
Right.
false revelation.
Right. Well, the false revelation is my translation from Hebrew,
Oh,
because in
okay.
Hebrew, that is really the study of false revelation. That's what it's
Yeah.
called. In English, it's something like I'll have to look it up, but but the study of false revelation, yes, I did find that to be, uh, ironic, if nothing else, given that he, at some point in his writing, I found that he announces he had a full. It wasn't. But this is another thing that surprised me, was that he didn't suddenly have a nervous breakdown. He had years of theorizing in writing the reasons for why he must stop being a scientist and must become the Messiah. And, theories about how all science is belongs to the bad influence of Christianity, and that his take in being a biostatistician was something that he needed to let go of as he was becoming his new self. So I was struck by, one, the fact that he lived with these thoughts for so long and I wasn't aware of it. And two, that the madness was so logical.
Yeah.
Everything had an explanation for him. It was all mapped out.
And it was all documented. So much of it.
Which is another very interesting thing, because he wrote this all, as far as I know, only for himself. As far as I know, nobody else read these texts.
And maybe no one would have, if you had
I'm pretty sure that nobody would have, yes.
But you also, you learn about him in the book and wrestle with these sides of himself, but you also write about kind of learning about yourself and thinking about yourself. And I wonder if you could talk about, I mean, if you want, you can read, obviously, if you want to read, you should read, but like the sense of the queerness of the book, or the sense of your visits with your father in the summer, and how that relates with your kind of queer awakening.
Right. Thank you. So this is a really important question, because for a very long time, one of the things that were the hardest for me to understand was whether I was writing two completely separate books or one. Because on the one hand, it was one, because it was my childhood, my life, but then I didn't know how to connect the fact that every time I wrote about my childhood with him and had memories that I didn't have or actively have before I started to write, but they started to come in a very profound and rapid pace. And they were all about, as you said, about my queer awakening. And it's sort of like a queer awakening before the fact, because I'm very young, I have no idea, right? But there was something about my relationship with him that really enabled that part. And the more I wrote, the more I realized how much this bond that I had with him, that never had this specific name, we didn't know anything about how to call it, whatever, was really so strongly tied to my queer childhood. And in many, many ways, the summers with him were my what I call in the book, my queer survival. It was
your queer survival.
Yeah. So I'm happy to read a short part if you want.
Sure.
About,
If you want to, yeah.
I'd like to. It's out now. This is the first time I'm talking about it. Let's read a little. Okay. So this part is called Underwater. One of my favorite activities during the summer visits I had with my dad was going to the pool. At age 7, I barely knew how to swim, but going to the pool with him was never about swimming. Unlike my mom, who had always gender policed me, my dad didn't care. My parents were divorced, so I lived, just to clarify for those, I lived in Israel with my mother, and I would visit my father, who lived in the United States as a child. He had no issue with me not wearing the bikini top. He never asked anything about it. He just let me be. And this alone was an occasion for celebration. Without the top, I walked proudly around the entire pool area, looking down my flat, narrow chest, and then looking all around, imagining that everybody's thinking, what a cute boy. At last, I was the cute boy in a small swimming suit, and the world was mine. I have a vivid memory of one such day. I think we were in Ann Arbor, or maybe it was Berkeley. I must have been 7 or max 8 when we visited the local pool. I remember feeling my body melting in the water. as if it happened yesterday. The shallow water hugs my little body. I dip my head and I twist around myself. Once, twice. I can't really swim, but I can float, twist, and turn. I open my eyes, and through my goggles, I see my skinny bare chest, and my skinny legs are touching the pool. Hop, hop, I jump. I close my eyes to better see the bump that I imagine I have between my legs, under my bathing suit. I circle around myself and I imagine that small, beautiful bump. As long as I'm underwater, I am totally free. I am a free child circulating around herself, skinny legs, skinny arms, skinny chest, small bump. I am such a cute boy. I float and I smile. This memory fills me with a wave of warmth even now. My body feels the water as if it just happened. It is touching my chest and my feet are touching the pool's floor. I can even see my father. He's waiting for me at the edge of the pool, smiling, holding a big blue towel. He lets me stay in the water for a long time until my lips turn purple. Then he says, "Gilly, it's time to get out. It's too cold. Let's get you warmed up and get some lunch, steak and fries." It wasn't that my dad was ever part of my dreamy, stolen moments of freedom underwater, or that I ever shared with him my desire to be a boy. But he never interrupted my dreams either. He never asked why I was not wearing a top. He never asked why I referred to myself in the masculine form. He just let me be me. And when I would ask him, wet and cold out of the water, "Do I look like a boy?" he would smile and say, "You look like a very cute boy."
It's so beautiful. So, you had most of the year, you only saw your father in the summers then when he was working on different college campuses, and otherwise you were
Right.
living with your mother, and your mother was policing your gender and saying, you need to wear a top and this is how to be, to dress, and he gave you a sense of freedom. But you also, and I found this such an interesting moment too, just that when the moment when you finally do come out, I don't remember how old you are, but your mother said you need to talk, you need to tell your father, and then he
Yeah,
comes out to you. And I know some
right.
people are, and or might be curious about what was the nature, like how how he saw himself as the Messiah, like what was he supposed to do, and why he like how he sees that moment for this
Right.
mutual coming out of sorts.
Right. So I won't read the whole scene because it's long, but let me see, because I just think this is sort of an important moment in the book. I'll sort of read parts and pieces of it, so I won't take the whole time. So this one is called "Coming Out." I just turned 20 when my dad told me for the first time that he was the Messiah. The two of us were in a coffee shop near Tel Aviv University for a meeting set up by my mother, his divorcee of 14 years. She called him a few days earlier to set up the meeting that she described as an emergency situation. She never talked to him, and so this gave the event an exceptionality. My dad could hardly hide his excitement when he told me, "Let's just meet in our usual place." I'm going to skip a little bit. So here we were, father and daughter. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to start a tiny bit before. Okay, just a few days earlier, I came out to my mom, assuming, in fact, that her being a poet, a bohemian, and an open minded romantic soul, she would embrace my lesbianism, hesitant as it was. Far from it. Her response at first was denial. "You are not." Second, the second, which followed right after, was, "We're not going to talk about this anymore. You will talk about this with your father. These kinds of perversions run in his family."
Wow.
So there we were, father and daughter, once very close, now removed, sitting in a cafe to discuss perversions. Finally, I am skipping a little, but finally, after a long silence, my dad smiled and said, "So, Yelda, what's the emergency?" "Yelda," he said, "not daughter, not my child, but girl kid, which is how he always called me, using the Hebrew feminine for kid, Yalda. His voice brought back wave of nostalgic memories. Then I go into the memories, which I will now skip. Yalda, his voice woke me up from daydreaming. I felt a twisting in my chest. I missed him. I missed us and our special bond. I missed our magic summer. I missed like my childhood. I looked at him now, this man in his mid-40s. I used to know him so well, or so I thought. His eyes looked so sad. I don't want to hurt him, I thought. Then I don't want to be hurt by him. Come on, what is it, Gili? Drugs? You're pregnant? You want to quit college? No, no, I responded, a bit disappointed with the list of cliches that he pulled out of his pocket. Then, after a deep breath, I spewed it out. I think I'm a lesbian, maybe bisexual. My dad lowered his eyes, took another sip of his coffee, and said, That is it? That is the emergency? The big news? He seemed overtly disappointed. Then he pulled the chair closer and said, in a prophetic tone, None of this is important, Gili. Gay, straight, bisexual, whatever. These are all inyanei dioma. He used the rabbinic Aramaic, not even Hebrew, to say matters of daily, inyanei dioma, which made the conversation feel like it has a register far from daily matters. Then, before I had a chance to respond, he continued, These are all small details in God's plan, silly little details. Why are you wasting your time on these matters of ha'olam hazeh, this world, when all that really matters is ha'olam haba, the world to come? I stared at him, hoping to detect a smile, but no, he was dead serious. And after another sip of what was left of his coffee, he lifted his arms high and pronounced theatrically, Now, thank you for sharing your news, and now let me share mine. He leaned over very close and whispered in my ear, Ani HaMashiach, Abba Shelach Nivchar, Abba Shelach HaMashiach Emet. I am the Messiah. Your father was chosen. I am the real Messiah. And with a triumphant smile, he added, Now that is big news.
Wow, he bested you in that moment.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. His coming out totally took over.
And that, and that is the beginning of what will be the end for him. And even like he had this professional reputation, very successful, serious scholar, working at different universities. And then as an expression of his view of being a Messiah, like how did that impact, how did he continue in the classroom? How did that impact like the himself on the stage? Was he writing letters to people? Like,
yeah, so for the first few years, he managed to just to a certain degree contain it. I mean, I later found out when I found his writings that he actually wrote lots of letters to Prime Minister Rabin, to many rabbis that all, announcing that he's the Messiah, giving them advice, telling them what to do. I even found a response from the office of Rabin's ministry that just said, "Thank you, Professor Hochberg. Thank you for being a good citizen."
Thank you for being a good citizen.
I had a chance, you read the book, so you know that I interviewed actually also. I did feel that in terms of his profession, I couldn't do this by myself. So I actually reached out to two of his colleagues. Both of them are very, very famous. One of them lives in India. One of them is partially in Israel, partially in the United States. And they were very enthusiastic and very warm. It was interesting because they did not want to initially. I was really curious to exactly your question. How was he able to do it? And they were very, they just kept telling me about the important research he did and this essay that he published this, and I pushed and pushed, and this was the pandemic, and these were very long Zoom conversations.
Wow.
Where I said that I really had to explain that this was very important for me, that I understand that they don't feel comfortable. And one of them, especially Ajit, was eventually willing to talk about it. And it was very meaningful because he told me that part I wrote, part I didn't, but he did tell me that people really did not know how to relate to it. I was under the impression, which was not right, that he kind of kept it only to his wife, to me, but apparently he went to, up until 2002, he still went to academic conferences, and instead of presenting his research, he would present statistic formulas that prove that there is a very high chance that he is the Messiah, and that, and all kinds of other things. And it tied to his profound growing attachment to a very specific type of messianic Zionism. And so apparently he also would prove, things about the dates of the Third Temple, etc. And the last time he taught was at NYU in 2002, and that really, he was then forced into early retirement after, I think, students just didn't know what to do. And eventually one student complained, and then once they realized that this has been going on for quite a while, then they asked him to please retire.
Yeah. It's amazing that it is worth noting. I think it's really important to know, even just from your standpoint as like the rigorous scholar you are putting together this book, that you weren't just relying on his papers and your memory, but you were consulting his colleagues, and you also interviewed family members, and this was part of, the thoroughness of your work. But I do, I know we don't have a huge amount of time, but I do want to sort of talk about a couple more things before we get to the questions. One is, because you're talking about this zeal and his relationship with his faith, that he used science, he used science to prove that he was the Messiah, even though like he was an expert in sort of the false revelation, someone who was a self-proclaimed Messiah. But you write about this being a Jewish book, but you yourself don't have a relationship with the religion of Judaism. You also don't see it yourself as culturally Jewish, or you refuse that kind of notion of culturally Jewish. I wonder if you could just talk about your sense of your Jewishness that came out of this project.
Yeah, thank you. That's a hard one. I mean, not hard in the sense that, it's hard. It's very complex. It's the hardest for me to articulate. I think what I could say is that in many ways, what I learned from writing this book is that I never really understood why Judaism was important to me at all, because as I said, I'm not culturally Jewish. I don't sort of, I never particularly, I tried actually when my children were born, I thought it would be very important that they will, grow Jewish. So I tried to do all this like Reform Judaism, and I just couldn't relate to it at all. But there was something so strong. And then when I wrote the book, it just became clear. I mean, it's, I sang Hasidic songs with my dad in a trailer in Bloomington,
Indiana.
Sorry. Yes, yeah. Bloomington, Indiana. And I still know all these songs by heart. And he also let me be like the lead choir boy. So it was this language of the Hasidic songs. It's my language of queerness. It's my bond with him. It's not something that I can translate into any kind of
Mm.
either American Judaism or Zionism, obviously. It's just a something so personal and so much of the language of my childhood and the language of the playfulness that I had with him. And I think what I loved as a child was that I felt him even as an adult. Children feel it. I felt he was playing like he was a kid. You
Yeah.
know how you can tell when adults are faking or
Yeah.
they're, he was, that was a moment where we would both be liberated by singing and screaming and dancing in this trailer to these
And
Hasidic songs.
the play between you two, like you were saying, he didn't play like an adult in a way, like he
Right.
in those moments with you was allowing himself to be a child and
Completely.
and allowing himself to play. And you
Yes.
also write about the nature of those games that you played
Right.
were, you know, you already wrote about how you could kind of be a boy with him and and let you be a boy and let you
Right.
be the lead choir boy in the
Right.
in the Hasidic choir. But also he it seemed like was able to play with identity. There was sort of the mean Abba or
Right.
these games of and I just wonder if you could comment on the nature of that play that was so rich for you both.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. There's the part of the book where I really talk about how I think that the playing, specifically playing with him, really was the main source of my queer childhood survival because, and was his too. So we had a few games, and one of them was called the Big Toilet Paper.
Mhm.
And there are reasons why my father liked playing that game, but we would imagine that,
Yeah.
and he invented these.
Yeah, these are sort of like file under things you don't expect to find in your father's archive that maybe you're like,
Absolutely,
I shouldn't be looking
absolutely,
here. This is more
absolutely.
information.
So yeah,
Yeah,
there's a whole section on toilet, but those we're not going to discuss.
we
So
don't need to
people
go
can
into
read
those
those.
here.
No,
Yeah,
but toilet paper was quite central for my father. So a
yeah.
big toilet paper would we would imagine that it's coming and running after my father, and I have to stop the big toilet paper, and he would run, and I would, dudes. That was one. We had to play the Gestapo is coming.
Mhm.
And that, obviously, I didn't think about it then. But of course, when I wrote the book and I thought, I cannot believe he literally played with me. The Gestapo is coming. And, then it brought it. I also realized that, of course, writing about him was not possible to not write about his parents. And then the place of the completely unspoken,
Never spoken.
never spoken trauma where just nobody is allowed to mention anything. And he grew up in this household where you couldn't turn on the light, you're not allowed to open the shade because everybody can see you. They never they
Mhm.
my grandparents just never managed to sort of have any sort of change of mentality. They continued to live as refugees who were haunted, and because nothing was discussed, the way he dealt with it, I figured later when I was writing this, was that we were playing these games. Gestapo is coming, we were running away, the Nazis are coming, all these games, and I was 8, 9, 10, 12. I mean, this was he. But to him, this was very normal. And then our last game, my favorite was the mean Abba, which he would, kind of stage that I have done something bad, and he would come with a broom and pretend that he is going to punish me. And we both had, I mean, I write about this. There's of course lots to say about these kinds of scenarios, but I kind of push back against what I suggest would be kind of a Freudian reading of this, as if it were like some perverse sexuality, because I think in the case of my father and I, it really was. I remember it as a pure space of playfulness, where it was very. We both knew it was perverse. That was part of the That was part of the game.
Mhm.
Let's do this perverse thing together.
But you kind of each allowed each other your own forms of queerness. Like if you think of, the
Absolutely.
origin,
I agree.
origins of the word queerness is like, or perversity is, she was like, the perversity runs on your side, your father's side,
Yes.
but ways of going outside of the norm, like, ways of
100%.
defying,
100%.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so in a way you both allow that of each other in that space in a way that you both maybe really needed, but it was a very intimate space. Like you say, it could be
Yes.
the size of a trailer, in Bloomington,
Yeah.
Indiana. Um, and then you're revisiting this in putting together this project and writing this book, and it's many years, it's 2013 or so when you first get the
Yeah.
papers, and then at 2020 in 2020 during the pandemic that you really go deep into it.
Yes.
And I'm sure, like we say, the challenges of this process, you would have moments where you're like, what am I doing? Where am I going with this? Who's going to want to read this? And I wonder what kept you focused, what kept you driven to produce what would be
Mm.
this book?
Well, I'll be honest and say that I wasn't always that, I mean, I did sometimes take breaks. I had a lot of doubts, but I also had, in this particular case, because I didn't feel it was driven by just an intellectual need. It really was, it the need to write this was much stronger than the fears and the doubts. Many times I asked myself, I mostly asked myself, what is this?
Yeah. What
What,
is this
because,
the
and then I thought in
formless? Yeah.
myself, because his writing also is so esoteric and so strange. And I thought, how can I write about a writing that is completely unreadable and about blue snails and had relationship to this rabbi that from the 18th century that he somehow believes is related to him and related to this blue snail and
Which
I
was
thought
the blue of what was it? The
the
season?
tzitzit,
Yeah,
yeah.
seats. Yeah.
um and I did many times. I thought, why would anybody want to read this? um I mean, you are one of my earliest readers, so in many ways you are really responsible for this because you were interested.
Oh, well, I mean, it's for me, I think it's really fascinating. I do, I think I told you about there's a writer, Ada Calhoun, whose father is the late Peter Sheldall, who was a
Yeah.
very important art critic at the New Yorker and Village Voice before that. And she talks about, or we spoke about this idea of the daddy box, like
Yes.
the when there's a only child who's a daughter, usually, or there's a daughter who inherits this book of her brilliant, complicated parent that is
Yeah.
not a book, but a file box
Right.
or a bag, but it is a mess. And it becomes almost the daughter's work to like nurture it. Like you say, you're like, I need to preserve this or to translate it or to find order, but also to try to reconcile or make peace with this very complicated relationship.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and for you, in the act of you participating in the project, you were in dialogue with your father, like literally having
Right.
dialogues with him. Was it hard for you to come to the end of this project and feel like now that relationship will end or those dialogues will end?
Hmm. Yes, very. I was very, very, very afraid of ending. Um, I also, kept going back and back into the archive because, of course, I couldn't include all of his writings. So I kept thinking, what about those that I didn't include? What about those that I didn't include? And how did I, what made me choose? How could I possibly make the selection? Maybe I should do it like, like unedited footage. Just
Hmm.
here it is. Um, But well, I mean, I think it's I went for so many stages. The first years after his death, it took me a while to understand how much it affected me. I then was really very, very depressed. Then I took a while to recover. Then the years of writing, and I mean, in a way, I was ready, but also I can't tell what happens because that's a surprise. But a
Yeah,
miracle happened, and the miracle brought the book to
it's
its
human.
end. And it was, my dad's poetics. I didn't decide how to end or when to end. It worked his way, it's suddenly he was right that sometimes you need to just surrender and a miracle will happen.
Miracle of miracles. Um,
Yes.
wonder of wonder, miracle of miracles.
Yes.
Um, but but you feel like you're in a way like burying or putting to rest this work is sort of like putting to rest that relationship or putting to rest your, your duty, like that idea of like
Yeah.
honoring your father.
Yes.
Yes.
That 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 yes. I mean, and I think whenever one finishes a project that takes very long, there's always that feeling of, I won't be able to do anything again. And this particular one, it does feel like to go through something that is so intense, so intimate, so, has so many layers, did bring me even to be in touch with, his relatives that I'm not normally in touch with, that I had to ask for permission to use their photos. They're not, exactly the people who would read this kind of book. They absolutely will not, and luckily so. But it's so right now I'm sort of, it's kind of this fear of, will I ever be able to write anything again? Because, right? Because it's how do you come back from daddy's box to just other boxes? It's not the same.
I would think that it would free you up because now you've put
Mm,
that to rest, and so it's not over hanging over you
I see.
anymore.
I'll
But
try.
speaking for myself, like when as soon as I met you and found out about this project, I just was immediately pulled in, and there's so much in your writing that really I find resonant, in terms of the the sense of twinning,
Yeah.
the duality, the being seen, the way he could see you allowed you to see yourself,
Yes. Yes.
and you are seeing him and helping other people see him maybe in a way that is more full and true than he, certainly made himself. um yeah, that he was more than his end, that he was more than his
Right.
madness, that he was.
No, that's for sure. But I also do want to just mention that, uh, the reason that, I chose you, as to be a early reader of an early draft, much, much, much earlier draft, was because I read Fairyland, a memoir of my father, and I thought this is the only person I know who like really sort of writes about her father's writing, but also dares to kind of, really introspective, that kind of has a relationship with him through it. So to me, this is really just to be in dialogue with you means a lot because I have been in dialogue with you long before you knew it.
Mm. Yes, well, I like to think we're both part of the tribe of fatherless daughters who are tackling have tackled the daddy box, which I feel like many of us carry around without really doing the
Yeah.
work of tackling. But I think that you do such a beautiful job here, and it is intimate and wild. Like I love the way you're like, this is a queer text because it's a messy text. It's a Jewish text because it's nonlinear, or
Right.
but you just bring what you bring to the page as a deep thinker and a scholar and a reader of literature, but also of human nature, which I feel like you're really investigating your own um, grief and a sense of self alongside his and using. Yeah, it's just I love it. I think it's a beautiful collaboration. I will agree that it is a
Thank you.
work of collaboration. So maybe we
Thank
have
you.
some questions from the audience that we can.
Yeah. So Mel says, thank you so much for this moving conversation. I'm curious how your relation to the ideas of memoir and closure have evolved in the process of writing this book. Was closure of some kind sought or achieved? What became of the memories you plumbed and fixed inside this book?
Thank you. This is a great question and difficult to answer. I would say that the closure I was seeking, I did not find because I realized about midway that I was looking for a wrong closure. I was looking to organize too much. I was looking to sort of make sense of things in a sense that I wanted to really preserve the perfectness of my memory of my father as a child. He was the perfect father, and then he was the worst father. And I really wanted this binary, and I was really committed to it. And then the reading him and reading his letters to me as a child, all of this sort of was challenged completely. But I learned I kind of have a very different understanding of closure, which was one of really of letting go and almost really accepting that there is, in terms of memory, also when I was writing this, I had a lot of involuntary memories. Some of them were very unpleasant, very unpleasant. Some of them were not related to my father, but some of them were so persistent that I included them in this book because they were, knocking on the door nonstop saying, me too, me too. So I included them too. Um, but I guess the short answer is that I always had respect to memory, but now I have respect to memory in the sense that I sort of feel that we can't predict where memory will take us. And it also doesn't matter so much if, a lot of the beginning I was really struggling was, is this a real memory or is this a memory because of a photo or if this, and then I just sort of stopped and I realized that the nature of real and not real and control, all that doesn't belong to the sphere of memory. So closure for me, I would say, is mostly in the sense of surrendering to these memories and I let them dictate. I let them dictate the order of the book. I just let them dictate what was going on.
I may have a few follow-up questions that I'm curious about, but I definitely want to privilege the questions from the audience too. But I'm wondering, you know, in the case like when I was writing my book, I felt like I had this archive and it was my like what I got to keep, and it was
Mm-hmm.
sort of, and if no one else, if I didn't do something with it, no one would. And so it was this awesome responsibility. But I also felt a lot of freedom because everyone was, all the players in my story had died and I felt like I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have anyone to
Mm-hmm.
argue
Mm-hmm.
with. could say, no, this didn't, you shouldn't write about this.
Right.
I felt like I can write about this because no one's going to tell me not to. And I guess I wonder, your mother is still alive and she's in the book and photographs of her in the book. You write about your stepmother, and you already talked about some of your extended family whose permissions you need to share. But I wondered if your mother was supportive of this project, if has read or will
She
read.
may even be on this call, so I'm
Oh,
not sure.
okay. All right.
I don't know. I don't know because time differences, but she did mention that she maybe will
Yeah.
join the call. But I'll just say that yes, of course it's complex. I did at some point decide that the only thing that matters for me writing this book, the only thing was my bond with my father, and what I needed to do was his. This was me and him. So I sort of I knew that there was I knew there were parts that were maybe not directly flattering to some people, maybe my mother, definitely to his wife. Um, I I sort of just took it as this just has to be because this is what this is what this necessary it was necessary.
Yeah. It was necessary. Like
It
the
was necessary.
purpose was more, you know, was stronger than the concern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlotte and Mona ask, did the politics of the Israeli occupation of Palestine come up with you and your father?
Thank you for the question. Yes. So definitely did. I do write about it too. We limited conversations about this, but it did come up quite a few times. The way that he would sort of relate to my politics was that he sort of saw me as a lost case. In fact, he gave me a Siddur, which is the prayer book, and I found it not too long ago. A friend was visiting and asked me what it is, and I opened it, and I didn't even remember that he wrote in it. He wrote a dedication, and the dedication is all about how he prays for me that I will come back to
Mm.
to my people, to my religion, to etc. So it wasn't really a space that we could have a conversation about because we were living in different mental universes. He was conversing. I mean, one of his attempts, he made several attempts, committed suicide, and one of them was he was called by Moses to jump from the window, so he jumped from the sixth floor. So it's not like we could sit down and have a conversation about Zionism and occupation. It was we were occupying at that point we were occupying not just completely opposite political spheres, but really we were in different worlds. We didn't
Yeah.
share.
He was untethered to reality from reality.
No. Which again, in the book, as you know, and those who will read it would say, I also do at some point question the nature of it. Yes, he was diagnosed. He had psychotic episodes, but the nature of it was not foreign to the growing Zionist messianism that's
Yeah.
really as a movement started in the 90s. And I don't need to remind anybody where we are with it now, not in a good place.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do think that the language that of his madness was definitely
Mm.
um, borrowed and shared by what I call in the book, madness on a national level.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is really beautifully put in the book. And certainly, I think people should look at some of your other works of scholarship and books
Mm.
on the topic too, because you are a Middle East scholar at Columbia University. I wonder, the work of maintaining and keeping this archive. Are you going to keep holding that archive? Now that you've finished this project, is there a place where you could donate the archive? Have you thoughts about that future? Like
Mm,
if do your children have any interest in this
ah,
story and their grandfather?
that's interesting. So I think they do. They mostly, I thank them at the end of the book for asking me. They mostly like me telling them stories about, the great grandparents that they never met, because for them, these are funny, the stories of Tippy and Herschel. They're actually kind of sad stories, but, they're so foreign to them, this idea that they love when I tell them that I would go to my grandparents and my grandmother would say, "Do you want some salad?" I'd say yes, and then she would say, "Great," and she would cut an onion and put some lemon on it and said, "Here, salad." Right? So they love these kind of stories. So, and I think they met my father. They were very young, 7 and 4. I don't know if they remember much, but I do talk about him. But they're also 20 and 17, so it's not exactly the center of their life. But for now, it's the it's I don't yeah, I think it's just going to be my little archive here.
Mhm. Yeah. And now, you have people can spend time with this relationship and with this story and this archive that have shaped into a beautiful book.
Thank you, thank
It's
you.
really it's so deep and rich and thoughtful, and I kept like underlining and underlining and underlining.
Mm,
I love it so much.
thank you.
Well, as we've come to the end of our program, I really want to thank you both for joining us tonight. And congratulations, Gil, on this remarkable
Thank you.
book.
Thank you for hosting me. The best bookstore in the world,
You're too kind.
City
And
Lights
Alysia,
Bookstore.
Alysia, thank you for your
And Alysia, of
generosity and your
course.
thoughtfulness in doing the honors. Just much respect and much gratitude to you both.
Oh, it's such an honor, and I think City Lights you're the perfect bookstore to host this conversation. And I am can't wait to return to San Francisco so I can come into that historic building. You don't know, I tell all of my students all the time, I'm like, you have to go to San Francisco and go to City Lights. It is a necessity when you're there to go there. So anyway, thank you for keeping this powerful bookstore and the esprit of the bookstore alive.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you all, and thank you for the audience for being
Yeah.
here.